Thalmor stood at the entrance of the Galactic Council chamber and felt the weight of his own importance. He was 8 feet tall, with a body covered in crystalline plates that shimmered blue and gold under the station lights. He had lived for 3,000 years. He had negotiated peace between warring empires. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. When he walked into a room, everyone noticed. The council chamber was massive. It could hold 500 beings from across the galaxy. The ceiling stretched high above, showing a projected view of the stars outside. Rows of seats curved in a half circle, facing a central platform where speakers stood. The front rows were always the most important. That was where power sat. Thalmor moved forward with slow, deliberate steps. His crystalline body made soft clicking sounds as he walked. Lesser diplomats moved aside to let him pass. He saw the Vryn delegation already seated in the second row, their golden armor polished to perfection. The Cathara occupied the third row, their multiple eyes watching everything. The Palaxian consortium had claimed seats on the right side, close to the center. Everything was as it should be. Power recognized power. The strong took their place at the front. Then Thalmor noticed something odd. Along the back wall of the chamber, he saw humans, 5 of them, standing casually near the rear entrance. They wore simple uniforms in dark blue. They were not sitting. They were not pushing forward to claim better positions. They just stood there, relaxed, as if the back of the room was exactly where they wanted to be. Thalmor had heard of humans, of course. Everyone had. They were a young species, only 200 years into space travel. But they had spread quickly. They had established colonies on dozens of worlds. Their trade ships were everywhere. Their military had won respect in several small conflicts. By all measures, they should be sitting in the front rows claiming their place among the important species. But they were not. They were in the back. Thalmor filed this observation away and continued to his assigned seat in the front row, center position. He settled his large frame into the chair designed for his species. From here, he could see everything. He could see who mattered. The session began. Trade agreements were discussed. Border disputes were mediated. Thalmor spoke twice, and both times the chamber fell silent to hear his words. This was proper. This was how things worked. During a recess, Thalmor remained seated while others mingled. He watched the room with ancient eyes. The Vryn diplomats gathered near the platform, their voices loud and confident. The Cathara formed small clusters, their whispers spreading information like a network. The Palaxians talked about profit margins and shipping routes, and the humans stayed in the back. They had moved to different positions now. One stood near the left exit. Another had positioned himself by the right wall. A third was near the main entrance. A woman with short black hair stood close to a communications panel. A younger man stood near an emergency station. Thalmor found this curious. They were not together as a group. They had spread out, covering different areas of the room. But they were still all in the back, still along the walls, still near the exits. When the session resumed, Thalmor paid less attention to the speakers and more attention to the humans. The woman with short black hair seemed to be the leader. Her name badge read G1 Earth Delegation. She sat in the very last row, corner seat. She had a data pad and made notes occasionally. She looked completely comfortable, as if she had chosen the worst seat in the room on purpose. The session ended 3 hours later. Thalmor watched as delegates filed out. The Vryn left first, as was their custom. They were the strongest military power, and they always left first. The Cathara followed, moving as a group. The Palaxians took their time, making last-minute deals in the aisles. The humans waited. They did not push forward. They did not rush to leave. They stood in their positions along the walls and let everyone else exit first. Only when the room was nearly empty did they move toward the doors. Thalmor made a decision. He stood and walked toward the human woman, Jiwan. His height made him tower over her. She was perhaps 5.5 feet tall, small by galactic standards. She looked up at him with calm, dark eyes. "Ambassador Jiwan," Thalmor said. His voice resonated deep and powerful, as a Vryn voice should. "I am Thalmor, Supreme Diplomat of the Vryn Empire." "I know who you are, sir," Jiwan said. She smiled politely. "It is an honor to meet you." "I have a question," Thalmor said. He gestured at the empty chamber. "Why do your people sit in the back?" "Earth has earned respect in the galaxy. Your economy is strong. Your military is capable, yet you position yourselves like a minor species that has just joined the council. Jiwon's smile did not change. It is a cultural preference, sir. We find these positions comfortable. Comfortable? Thalmor's crystalline plates shifted, showing his confusion. The back of the room? The worst seats? This is comfortable? For us, yes, Jiwon said simply. We prefer to have a full view of the room. We like being near the exits. It is just how we are. Thalmor studied her face. She was not lying, but she was not telling the complete truth either. He had negotiated with thousands of species over thousands of years. He knew when someone was holding back information. A full view of the room, Thalmor repeated slowly. You can see better from the back? In a way, yes, Jiwon said. We can see everyone and everything. It suits our needs. Before Thalmor could ask more questions, one of Jiwon's people approached. The man was young, maybe 30 years old. His badge read Hyunwoo Aide. He spoke quietly to Jiwon in their human language. She nodded and turned back to Thalmor. I apologize, but I have another meeting to attend, Jiwon said. Perhaps we can speak more another time. Yes, Thalmor said. Another time. He watched as Jiwon and Hyunwoo left the chamber. They took a side exit, not the main one. Another human, a woman in a security uniform with Minji on her badge, followed a few steps behind them. She glanced back at Thalmor once before disappearing through the door. Thalmor stood alone in the empty council chamber. He looked at the front rows where the powerful species sat. Then he looked at the back rows at the corner where Jiwon had positioned herself. From there, she would have been able to see every entrance, every exit, every emergency station, every communications panel. A strange thought entered Thalmor's mind. What if the humans were not sitting in the back because they were weak? What if they were sitting in the back for a completely different reason? He dismissed the thought. It was ridiculous. Power sat at the front. It always had. It always would. The humans were simply a young species with strange customs. That was all. But as Thalmor left the chamber, he found himself looking at the exits and the walls and the emergency stations. He found himself thinking about sight lines and positions and coverage. He found himself wondering if he had misunderstood something very important about humans. The thought stayed with him as he walked back to his quarters. It stayed with him as he prepared for sleep in his meditation chamber. It stayed with him for the rest of the night, persistent and troubling, like an itch he could not scratch. Something was wrong with his understanding. And Thalmor, who prided himself on understanding everything, did not like that feeling at all. Thalmor could not let the question go. For 3 days it occupied his mind like an unwelcome guest. He told himself it was a small thing, a meaningless cultural quirk. But his instincts, honed over 3,000 years of observation, told him otherwise. He began to watch humans more carefully. The council station had perhaps 200 humans working in various roles. They were everywhere once he started looking. They worked as engineers, medics, traders, and security personnel. And every single one of them displayed the same strange behavior. In the station cafeteria, Thalmor observed a group of mixed species having lunch. The Vryn sat at a central table, their large bodies taking up significant space. The Cathara clustered nearby. The Palaxians occupied a table by the large viewing window, enjoying the sight of the stars. And 3 humans sat at a table in the corner, backs against the wall facing the room. Thalmor watched this for 3 days straight. The humans rotated, but their positions did not change. Always the corner, always backs to the wall, always facing outward. In the observation deck, where diplomats gathered to relax and network, the pattern repeated. Important species took the comfortable seats in the center of the room. Humans stood near the edges, near the doors, always with clear lines of sight to the exits. In the meeting rooms, the conference halls, the transit lounges, everywhere Thalmor looked, humans positioned themselves the same way. Back of the room, near the walls, close to exits. On the 4th day, Thalmor decided to investigate properly. He began with the commercial district of the station, where traders from across the galaxy bought and sold goods. He found a human merchant named Daisung operating a small stall that sold earth foods and goods. Daisung was a cheerful man with a round face and quick smile. His stall was positioned not in the center of the market where traffic was heaviest, but along the outer edge, with his back to the wall and a clear view of the entire marketplace. Ambassador Thalmor, Taesung said, his eyes widening with surprise when the tall crystalline figure approached. This is an honor. Can I interest you in some earth spices? Perhaps some tea? I have a question, Thalmor said, skipping pleasantries. Why is your stall positioned here at the edge? You would have better sales in the center. Taesung's smile faltered slightly. Oh, well, I like it here. I can see my customers coming. I can see the whole market. It is a good position. You can see everything, Thalmor repeated. This is important to you? I suppose so, Taesung said. His tone became cautious. Is there a problem with my stall location? I have all the proper permits, Thalmor waved a hand dismissively. No problem. I am simply curious about human behavior. Tell me, when you sit in your home, where do you prefer to sit? Taesung looked confused by the question. I suppose I like to sit where I can see the door. And the windows. Is this strange? Perhaps not, Thalmor said. Do all humans prefer this? I never really thought about it, Taesung admitted. But yes, I think so. My wife always takes the seat facing the restaurant entrance when we eat out. My brother always backs into parking spaces so he can pull forward when leaving. My daughter always sits in the back row at school. I guess it runs in the family. Thalmor thanked him and moved on. He found a human engineer named Soman, working on a power junction in one of the station corridors. She wore a maintenance uniform and had her tools spread around her. When Thalmor approached, she was positioned so she could see both directions of the corridor while she worked. You work in an exposed position, Thalmor observed. Does this not make you uncomfortable? Soman looked up from her work. She had grease on her face and looked tired. No more than usual, why? Most species prefer to work with their backs protected. Yet you position yourself in the middle of the corridor. Soman shrugged. I need to see if someone is coming. Do not want to get run over by a cargo hauler. Plus, if there is an emergency, I can respond quickly from here. This junction connects to 3 different sections. You think about emergencies while you work? Does not everyone? Soman asked. She sounded genuinely surprised. I mean, we are on a space station. Things can go wrong. You should always know where the emergency equipment is, where the exits are, how to get to safety. You think about this constantly? Well, not constantly, Somin said. But I notice these things. It is just common sense. Thalmor moved through the station, interviewing humans when he could, watching them when he could not. He spoke with a young diplomatic trainee named Yuna, who admitted she felt nervous sitting in the front of lecture halls and always chose seats near the aisles. He observed security officers who always stood with their backs to walls. He watched maintenance crews who positioned themselves with clear sightlines to their work areas. By the end of the week, Thalmor had compiled extensive notes. He sat in his quarters reviewing them. The pattern was undeniable. Every human on the station demonstrated the same unconscious behavior. They positioned themselves defensively. They maintained awareness of exits. They preferred to see rather than be seen. Thalmor's aide, a younger Vryn named Korval, visited him that evening. Korval found Thalmor surrounded by data pads and holographic displays, all showing notes about human behavior. Supreme Diplomat, Korval said carefully. I have heard you have been researching humans? I am trying to understand them, Thalmor said, not looking up from his notes. With respect, sir, is this necessary? They are a minor species. Their seating preferences seem unimportant. That is what troubles me, Thalmor said. He finally looked up, his crystalline eyes reflecting the light. It should be unimportant, but my instincts tell me I am missing something significant. Korval hesitated. The other delegations have noticed your interest. Some find it odd. Let them think what they wish, Thalmor said. I have lived 3,000 years by trusting my instincts. Something about human behavior does not fit the normal patterns of civilized species. Perhaps they are simply not civilized in the way we understand, Korval suggested. They are young. They have only been in space for 2 centuries. Thalmor considered this. No, they are civilized. They follow protocols. They honor agreements. They participate in galactic society. But underneath the civilization there is something else, something they all share. That night Thalmor could not enter his meditation state. His mind kept returning to the same questions. Why did humans position themselves this way? What were they preparing for? What did they see that others did not? The next day, Thalmor did something he rarely did. He confronted Ambassador Jiwan directly. He found her in a small conference room where she was reviewing documents. She sat in a chair against the far wall facing the door. Of course she did. Ambassador Jiwan, Thalmor said as he entered. We need to speak. Jiwan looked up calmly. Of course. Please sit. She gestured to the chairs around the table. Thalmor did not sit. He stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the entrance. I have been observing your people. I know, Jiwan said. You have been quite thorough. Then you know I am looking for answers. Why do humans position themselves this way? Why always in the back? Why always near exits? Why always with clear sightlines? Jiwan set down her datapad. I told you. It is cultural preference. That is not an answer, Thalmor said. His voice grew harder. That is an evasion. I have negotiated with hundreds of species. I know when someone is hiding something. We are not hiding anything, Jiwan said. But her tone had changed slightly. Become more careful. Are you afraid? Thalmor asked. Is that it? Are humans a fearful species and you hide it by calling it preference? For a moment something flickered across Jiwan's face. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else entirely. Something that made the ancient diplomat feel a strange sensation he had not felt in centuries. His own instincts screaming at him to be careful. We are not afraid, Jiwan said quietly. We are prepared. There is a difference. I'm prepared for what? For whatever comes, Jiwan said. She stood up from her chair. Despite her small size, her presence seemed to fill the room. Supreme Diplomat, you have lived a long life. You have seen peace maintained through strength and diplomacy. That is admirable. But humans have a different history. We have learned different lessons. What lessons? Thalmor demanded. Jiwan walked toward the door, toward him. She stopped a few feet away. That safety is an illusion. That danger can come at any moment. That the ones who survive are the ones who are ready. She stepped past him into the corridor. Before she left, she looked back. If you really want to understand us, Supreme Diplomat, stop looking at where we sit. Start looking at what we can see from where we sit. Then she was gone, her aide Hyunwoo appearing from somewhere to follow her. Thalmor stood alone in the empty conference room, his mind racing. He turned and looked at the chair where Jiwan had been sitting. From that position, she could see the door. She could see the emergency panel on the wall. She could see the ventilation grate. She could see the communications console. From that single chair, she could see everything she would need to see if something went wrong. Thalmor felt the pieces beginning to shift in his mind. He was close to understanding. But he was not there yet. He needed more data. He needed to see humans in action, not just in peaceful observation. He needed to see what they were preparing for. The celebration gala was the biggest event of the season. The Galactic Council had successfully negotiated a major trade agreement between 5 different star systems. It was a triumph of diplomacy, and everyone who mattered had been invited to celebrate. The grand hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. Long tables overflowed with food from a dozen different worlds. Music played, a careful blend of sounds that would not offend any species' hearing. Delegates dressed in their finest formal wear mingled and talked and made connections that would shape galactic politics for years to come. Thalmor stood near the center of the hall, exactly where he belonged. He wore ceremonial armor that marked his rank and status. Other important delegates surrounded him. The Vryn military commander stood to his left, discussing strategy. The Cathara trade minister floated to his right, her multiple tentacles gesturing as she spoke about shipping routes. The Palaxian financial director stood nearby, calculating profit margins on his personal data device. This was power. This was civilization. This was how the galaxy worked, and once again the humans were in the back. Thalmor had been watching for them. He spotted Jiwan standing near the rear wall holding a glass of some clear liquid. She wore a simple dark blue formal uniform, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. Her aide Hyunwoo stood about 15 feet away from her near a side entrance. The security officer Minji was positioned by another door. 2 other humans he did not recognize stood at different points along the walls. They were spread out, covering the room. Just like always, it bothers you, a voice said beside him. Thalmor turned. The Vryn military commander Zelthar was watching him with knowing eyes. Zelthar was old too, though not as old as Thalmor. They had served together in the war against the hive swarms centuries ago. What bothers me? Thalmor asked. The humans, their positioning. Zelthar gestured with one armored hand. I have noticed you observing them. You're trying to understand their tactics. They are civilians, Thalmor said. They should not have tactics. Zelthar made a sound that might have been laughter. All species have tactics. The question is whether they know they are using them. Before Thalmor could respond, the music changed. The celebration was reaching its peak. Servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of food and drink. A human server, a young woman whose badge read Boram, passed close to Thalmor carrying a tray of delicate glass sculptures filled with colored liquids. She moved efficiently, professionally, just another worker doing her job. Except Thalmor noticed that as she moved, she was also watching. Her eyes tracked the room, noting positions, counting people, observing exits. It was subtle, but it was there. Everyone was in motion now. Delegates danced or talked or ate. The noise level rose. The celebration was going exactly as planned. Then the alarm started. The sound was deafening. Red lights began flashing throughout the hall. A computerized voice announced in multiple languages, "Emergency. Reactor malfunction in Section 7. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones." This is not a drill. For a moment, everything froze. Thalmor felt his body tense, preparing for action. Around him, delegates from various species began to react. Then chaos erupted. The Cathara panicked first. Their species had an instinctive fear of radiation, left over from their homeworld's history. They surged toward the exits, their tentacles flailing. The Palaxians followed, their survival instinct overwhelming their usual calculation. Even some Vryn began pushing toward the doors, their military discipline forgotten in the face of sudden danger. Hundreds of beings, all trying to reach the exits at once. Thalmor stood firm, his training keeping him calm, but around him, civilization was breaking down. He saw delegates shove each other. He heard screaming in a dozen languages. The crowd became a stampede. And then Thalmor saw something that changed everything. The humans did not panic. Minji, the security officer, was already moving. She had crossed half the room in seconds, positioning herself at the main exit. But she was not trying to leave. She was directing traffic, her voice loud and clear even over the chaos. Single file. Stay calm. This exit can handle you all if you do not push. Hyunwoo had reached a communications panel on the wall. His fingers flew over the controls. Within seconds, he had established contact with station security. Jiwon was moving through the crowd, her small body somehow finding gaps that others could not. She reached a group of Cathara who were trampling each other in their panic. She spoke to them, her voice somehow cutting through their fear. They stopped. They listened. They began to move in an organized way. The server Boram had dropped her tray, but she had not run. She was at an emergency panel, pulling out breathing masks and distributing them to nearby delegates. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Thalmor turned in a circle, his ancient eyes taking in the entire room. Every human in the hall had moved into action. They had not discussed it. They had not waited for orders. They had simply acted, each one moving to exactly where they needed to be. The young human by the east exit was creating a safe corridor, keeping the crowd from crushing itself. Another human had found the fire suppression controls and was ready to activate them if needed. A third was helping an elderly Cathara delegate who had fallen. And their positioning, their seemingly random placement around the room, suddenly revealed itself as a perfect strategic network. They had been covering every exit, every emergency station, every communications panel, every potential bottleneck. They had been spread out in exactly the pattern needed to handle a crisis like this. They had not been sitting in the back out of weakness or deference. They had been controlling the room. Thalmor watched as the chaos began to calm. Minji and the other humans had created 3 organized evacuation routes. The stampede became an orderly exit. Delegates who had been shoving and screaming moments before were now moving calmly. Guided by human voices and human hands, a human in a maintenance uniform appeared, running through the crowd toward Jiwon. His badge read, Taewon, Engineering Chief. He spoke rapidly to her. Reactor is venting plasma. We can contain it if we shut down the coolant loop, but we need to do it from inside the section. How long? Jiwon asked, her voice calm. 10 minutes to get there, 5 minutes to complete the shutdown. We can do it. You will be exposed to radiation. We know, Taewon said. He was already gathering other humans in maintenance uniforms. We are already going. Just wanted you to know. He ran off, his team following. Thalmor watched them disappear through a service entrance. They were running toward danger, not away from it. The evacuation continued. Within 6 minutes, the hall was empty, except for a few stragglers being helped by humans. Thalmor stood near the center, where he had been throughout the entire event. He had not moved. He had watched Jiwan approach him. She looked tired but composed. "Supreme Diplomat, you should evacuate to the safe zone," she said. "In a moment," Thalmor said. His voice sounded strange even to himself. "Your people, they were ready." "Yes," Jiwan said simply. "You knew something like this could happen." "We knew something could happen. Not this specifically, just something. There is always something." Thalmor looked around the empty hall. Minutes ago it had been chaos. Now it was quiet except for the distant sound of alarms. "How did you coordinate?" "I saw no signals, no communication. You just moved. We did not need to coordinate," Jiwan said. She walked to the wall, to the spot where she had been standing when the alarm started. "From here I could see 12 exit points, 8 emergency stations, and 23 potential hazard zones." Hyunwoo was covering a different angle. Minji had another. "Together we covered the entire room." "You planned this." "We prepared," Jiwan corrected. "We did not plan for a reactor malfunction. We prepared to be useful if anything went wrong." "There is a difference." An update came through on Jiwan's communication device. She listened, then nodded. "Taewon's team has contained the reactor. No radiation leak beyond Section 7. 0 casualties. The all-clear will sound in 5 minutes." 0 casualties, Thalmor repeated. In a stampede of hundreds of panicking aliens, 0 casualties. Because humans had been positioned exactly where they needed to be. Jiwan looked up at him. In her eyes, Thalmor saw something he had not noticed before. Not fear, not aggression, but a deep fundamental awareness. A readiness that went beyond training, beyond planning, beyond conscious thought. "You asked me why we sit in the back," Jiwan said quietly. "This is why. Because when we sit in the back, we can see what is coming. We can be where we are needed. We can protect those who are too important or too powerful, or too civilized to protect themselves." She walked away, following her people to help with the final evacuation checks. Thalmor stood alone in the empty hall, his mind reeling. He had lived for 3,000 years. He had thought he understood power, understood strength, understood civilization, but he had been wrong. Or at least incomplete. The humans had shown him a different kind of power. Not the power to command, but the power to protect. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to respond. Not the civilization that rose above danger, but the civilization that prepared for it. And they did it all from the back of the room, where no one noticed them. Thalmor requested a private meeting with Jiwan the next day. He did not make demands. He did not use his status to force her time. He simply asked, and he used the word please. She agreed. They met in a small conference room far from the main council chambers. It was a neutral space, plain and functional. When Thalmor arrived, he found Jiwan already there. She sat in a chair against the far wall, facing the door. He almost smiled at the predictability of it, but now he understood what he was seeing. "Thank you for meeting with me," Thalmor said. He sat down at the table, choosing a chair in the middle. The position felt exposed now, vulnerable. "Of course," Jiwan said. "You want answers?" "I do." Thalmor folded his large hands on the table. "I have been alive for 3,000 years. I have studied hundreds of species. I thought I understood the patterns of civilized behavior. But yesterday I realized I have been blind to something fundamental about humans." Jiwan waited. She did not interrupt, did not rush him. She simply listened. "Your people were the only ones who did not panic," Thalmor continued. "In a room full of trained diplomats, military commanders, and experienced leaders, only humans kept their composure. Only humans acted. Only humans knew exactly what to do. We were lucky," Jiwan said. "The crisis was manageable." "No," Thalmor said firmly. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Your people were positioned perfectly. You moved with precision. You had already planned for an emergency, even though you could not have known what that emergency would be." Jiwan was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You are right. We had not planned for that specific emergency. But we prepare for emergencies in general. It is what we do." "Why?" Thalmor asked. "Why are humans the only species that does this?" Jiwan stood up from her chair. She walked to the window that looked out at the stars. Do you know anything about Earth history, Supreme Diplomat? Some you had wars. Most species do. We had many wars, Jiwan said. For thousands of years we fought each other. Tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. Many species go through violent periods in their development, Thalmor said. This is not unique. Perhaps not, Jiwan agreed. But our wars taught us something important. They taught us that safety is temporary. That peace is fragile. That danger can come from anywhere at any time. She turned from the window to face him. We evolved as both predator and prey, Supreme Diplomat. For millions of years, our ancestors had to hunt to survive. But they also had to avoid being hunted. They had to watch for threats constantly. They had to be ready to fight or run at any moment. Thalmor listened carefully. He was beginning to understand. That instinct never left us, Jiwan continued. Even after we built cities and civilizations, even after we reached the stars, we still carry it. We still watch the exits. We still check for threats. We still position ourselves defensively. But you are civilized now, Thalmor said. You have laws, peace, order. You no longer need these instincts. Jiwan shook her head. Civilization is a thin layer over our true nature. It is important, valuable, necessary, but it does not erase millions of years of evolution. Deep inside, we are still the species that survived by being alert, being prepared, being ready. She returned to her chair and sat down. We call it tactical awareness. Most humans do not even realize they do it. They sit with their backs to walls because it feels right. They choose seats near exits because it feels comfortable. They watch the room because it feels normal. An unconscious behavior, Thalmor said slowly. Inherited from your ancestors, yes, but also learned. Reinforced by our history. Jiwan's expression became serious. After our world wars, we developed a saying, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. We never forgot. We never let ourselves become complacent. So you sit in the back of rooms because you are preparing for danger that may never come? No, Jiwan said. We sit in the back because we accept that danger might come. And if it does, we want to be positioned to help, to protect, to respond. Thalmor thought about this. Yesterday your people did not panic. But others did. Trained diplomats, military officers, experienced leaders. They panicked like children. Why? Jiwan considered her words carefully. Because they have not had to live with constant awareness of danger. Species like the Vryn are strong. They dominated their homeworld. They had few natural predators. They built their civilization from a position of strength. And humans? We built our civilization despite being weak, Jiwan said. We were not the strongest. We were not the fastest. We were not the most armored. We survived because we were smart and careful and always prepared. She stood again, pacing slowly. In human philosophy, we have a concept called the gray man. It means someone who does not stand out, who blends into the background, who seems ordinary. But the gray man is always watching. Always ready. Always aware. Like sitting in the back of the room, Thalmor said. Exactly like sitting in the back of the room. Jiwan stopped pacing and looked at him directly. We do not sit in the front because we do not need to prove our importance. We know our value. It does not come from where we sit or how much attention we receive. It comes from what we can do when we are needed. Hyunwoo entered the room quietly. Thalmor had not even heard the door open. The young aide approached Jiwan and spoke softly. Ambassador, the council session begins in 30 minutes. Thank you, Hyunwoo, Jiwan said. She turned back to Thalmor. Is there anything else you want to know? Thalmor stood. His great height made him tower over both humans. But somehow he did not feel larger than them. One more question. The server at the gala, Borum. She distributed emergency supplies and helped evacuate people. That is not part of a server's training. Jiwan smiled slightly. All humans receive basic emergency training. Not formal military training, but practical skills. How to treat injuries. How to fight fires. How to evacuate buildings. How to stay calm in a crisis. We teach these things to our children. Why? Because we believe responsibility belongs to everyone, Jiwan said. Not just to soldiers or security officers or emergency personnel. Every human should be able to help if something goes wrong. Every human should be able to protect others if needed. She moved toward the door, Hyunwoo falling into step behind her. Before she left, she paused. Supreme Diplomat, you asked why we sit in the back. But I think the real question is different. The real question is, why does everyone else sit in the front? Thalmor had no answer to that. After they left, he sat alone in the conference room for a long time. He thought about his own species, the Vryn. They were mighty warriors. They had powerful armor and weapons. They had dominated their homeworld and then spread across the stars. They took pride in their strength, their power, their ability to stand at the front. But when danger came, they had panicked, just like the others, because they were not used to being vulnerable. They were not prepared for threats they could not intimidate or fight. Humans were different. They had lived with vulnerability for so long that they had learned to master it. They did not fight vulnerability. They accepted it. They prepared for it. They positioned themselves to handle it. And in doing so, they had developed a different kind of strength. Not the strength to dominate, but the strength to endure. Not the power to command, but the power to protect. Thalmor remembered something Jiwan had said. We sit in the back because everyone else is weak. He had thought she meant weak compared to humans. But now he understood. She meant weak in awareness, weak in preparation, weak in readiness. The Vryn stood at the front because they were strong, but the humans sat at the back because they understood that standing at the front did not make you safe. It just made you visible, and visibility was not the same as power. Thalmor stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy full of species that all thought they understood civilization, strength, and safety. But maybe they were all wrong. Maybe true strength was not about dominating others. Maybe it was about being ready to help them when they needed it. Maybe the humans sitting quietly in the back of every room, watching every exit, aware of every threat, were the strongest species in the galaxy, not because they could defeat anyone, but because they could protect everyone. Thalmor had one more thing to do. He needed to share what he had learned. He needed to tell the Galactic Council the truth about humans, and he needed to do it before anyone else made the mistake of thinking humans sat in the back because they were weak, because if other species realized how strong humans actually were, realized what that quiet watchfulness really meant, realized that every human in every room was a guardian waiting to act, they might react with fear, and fear could destroy the fragile peace that humans themselves had worked so hard to maintain. Thalmor left the conference room with a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had wanted to understand humans. Now he did. And understanding them had changed everything he thought he knew about power, strength, and civilization. The question now was, what should he do with that understanding? 1 week after the reactor incident, Thalmor requested a closed session of the Galactic Council. Only the highest-ranking members would attend. No aides, no observers. Just the leaders who shaped galactic policy. The meeting room was different from the Grand Council chamber. It was smaller, more intimate. A round table sat in the center, with chairs for each species representative. There were no front or back rows here. Everyone was equal in this space, at least in theory. Thalmor arrived early. He chose a seat and waited as others filed in. The Vryn military commander, Zelthar, the Cathara trade minister, Velkara, the Palaxian financial director, Morpex, representatives from a dozen other major species, and Jiwan representing Earth. She entered last, moving quietly. She took a seat at the table like the others. Thalmor noticed she had positioned herself where she could see both doors to the room. Even here, in the most secure location on the station, even surrounded by allies, her instincts placed her defensively. "Thank you all for coming," Thalmor began. His voice carried weight and authority. "I have called this session to discuss an important matter: humanity." Several representatives shifted in their seats. Jiwan remained perfectly still, her face showing nothing. "For the past 2 weeks I have been observing human behavior," Thalmor continued. "I noticed a pattern that troubled me. Humans consistently position themselves at the back of rooms, near walls, close to exits. They avoid central positions. They seem to defer to other species." Morpex, the Palaxian, made a dismissive gesture. "This is well known. Humans are a young species. They lack the confidence of older civilizations. Is this really worth a closed session?" "I thought the same," Thalmor said. "I was wrong. We have all been wrong about humans." That got their attention. The room became very quiet. Thalmor stood. He walked around the table slowly, choosing his words with care. "Last week during the reactor emergency, we all saw what happened. Hundreds of delegates panicked. Trained professionals lost control. Chaos erupted. A natural response to danger, Zelthar said. Fear is instinctive. Yet humans did not panic, Thalmor said. Not one. Instead, they acted. They organized. They controlled the situation. And they did so with precision that seemed impossible unless they had been prepared. He stopped walking and faced the group. They were prepared. Not for that specific emergency, but for any emergency. Because humans are always prepared. It is not a choice they make. It is part of who they are. Velkara's multiple eyes focused on Thalmor. You are saying their positioning is strategic? I am saying their positioning is instinctive, Thalmor corrected. Which makes it more profound. They do not choose to watch exits and emergency stations. They simply do it without thinking, the way we breathe without thinking. He gestured toward G1. Ambassador G1, would you explain to the Council what you explained to me? About human evolution and history? G1 stood. She spoke calmly, professionally. Humans evolved as both hunters and prey. We had to watch for danger constantly to survive. This created deep instincts for tactical awareness. Even in our modern civilization, these instincts remain. We position ourselves defensively without conscious thought. So you are saying humans are paranoid? Morpex asked. No, G1 said firmly. Paranoia is irrational fear. We do not fear danger. We simply acknowledge it exists. We accept that safety is temporary and that crises can happen, so we position ourselves to respond when they do. Zelthar leaned forward. This is military thinking. Are all humans trained soldiers? No, G1 said. But all humans receive basic emergency training. We believe that in a crisis everyone should be able to help. Not just security forces or military personnel, everyone. She paused, then continued. On Earth we have a saying. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. This is how we live. We build peaceful civilizations. We create art and music and culture. We enjoy life. But we never forget that danger can come. And when it does, we are ready. Thalmor spoke again. During the emergency, I watched humans move into action. A server distributed emergency supplies. An aide established communications. An engineer ran toward the danger, not away from it. They acted without orders, without hesitation, without fear. He looked around the table at each representative. Ask yourselves, if a crisis happened right now in this room, how would your people respond? Would they panic? Would they wait for instructions? Would they know what to do? The silence was uncomfortable. Everyone was thinking about the reactor incident, remembering how their own people had reacted. Humans sit in the back of rooms. Thalmor said slowly. We thought this meant they were weak or afraid or lacking confidence. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Humans sit in the back because they are the strongest, not in physical power, but in readiness, in awareness, in ability to respond. You are asking us to recognize humans as militarily superior? Zelthar asked. He sounded skeptical. No, Thalmor said. I am asking you to recognize humans as naturally suited for a role we have never properly defined. Guardians. Protectors. Not through force, but through preparation. Morpex spoke up. What do you propose? Some kind of special status for Earth? Thalmor had thought about this carefully. I propose we create a new designation. Guardian species status. It recognizes that certain species have natural abilities that make them suited for protection and emergency response. We give this status to Earth and allow them to continue doing what they already do, but with official recognition. What does this status include? Velkara asked. Priority placement near emergency systems on all Council facilities, Thalmor said. Official roles in emergency planning and response. Recognition that their positioning is strategic, not deferential. And most importantly, acknowledgement that sitting in the back does not mean sitting in a position of weakness. G1 spoke up. We do not need special status. We are content with our current role. But the galaxy needs to understand your role, Thalmor said to her. If we do not explain what human behavior means, others will continue to misunderstand. They will think you are weak. They will treat you as lesser. This benefits no one. He turned back to the Council. Yesterday's emergency proved something important. When danger comes, we need humans. Not because they are soldiers, but because they are aware. Because they are ready. Because they have made preparation a part of their culture. And if we do not grant this status, Zelthar asked, then we risk other species misreading human intentions, Thalmor said. We risk conflict based on misunderstanding. We risk losing the very protection that humans naturally provide. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives supported the proposal. Others were skeptical, but slowly Thalmor's words convinced them. The evidence was clear. Humans were different, and that difference had value. Finally, after much discussion, the vote was called. The proposal passed. Earth would receive guardian species status, the first of its kind in galactic history. G1 accepted the decision with quiet grace. We will continue to do what we have always done. Watch, prepare, protect when needed. The status does not change that. It is simply who we are. 3 days later, Thalmor attended another council gathering. It was a routine session, nothing special. He took his usual seat in the front row, center position, but for the first time in his long life he did not feel safe there. He felt exposed, vulnerable, visible. He turned in his seat and looked at the back of the room. Ji-won stood near the rear exit, her back to the wall, her eyes watching the room. Hyunwoo was positioned by a side door. Minji stood near an emergency panel. A human cargo specialist named Sunho had stationed himself where he could see both entrances. A human pilot named Yoonji stood casually near a communications console. They were spread out, covering the room just like always. But now Thalmor understood what he was seeing. They were not spectators. They were guardians. They were the ones who would act if something went wrong. They were the protection that everyone else took for granted. And he realized something profound. All the power and status and importance that came with sitting in the front row meant nothing if you were not safe. The truly powerful position was not the visible one. It was the prepared one. After the session, Thalmor approached Ji-won. She had been talking with Hyunwoo but turned when he approached. "Ambassador," Thalmor said, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever want to sit at the front?" Thalmor asked. "In the position of honor? To be recognized for your importance?" Ji-won smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and understanding. "Why would we want that, Supreme Diplomat? We have the best view from here." She gestured at the room before them. "From the back we can see everyone. We can see what they need. We can be ready to help when they need it. That is more valuable than any position of honor." Thalmor looked out at the emptying council chamber. He saw diplomats and leaders leaving, comfortable and secure, never thinking about the humans who had been watching over them the entire time. "We do not sit in the back because we are weak," Ji-won said quietly, repeating words she had said before. "We sit in the back because everyone else needs us to." Thalmor understood now. Completely. Finally. The strongest species in the galaxy were not the ones who demanded respect. They were not the ones who took the best seats or claimed the most power.